Death is unsettling enough on its own, but when you think about it happening on a transatlantic flight, thousands of feet in the air, that's a whole other level of disturbing, right? We're going to be talking about a story, well, it's from Reddit's No Sleep subreddit, so you know it's going to be good.
Oh yeah, no sleep. The place for allegedly true scary stories.
Exactly. And this one takes place on a flight, like I said, a transatlantic flight, where one of the passengers dies. And then the narrator, who stays anonymous, of course, they find themselves in a really, really strange situation.
I think it's fair to say that this story, it really shows the unique challenges that airlines face, when they have to deal with death mid-flight. And while I'm sure most airlines, I mean, they probably have protocols for this sort of thing, it's just not something that most people would probably think about.
Right. Definitely not something that's top of mind when you book a flight. And in this story, this situation, it just gets stranger and stranger. So the story begins with the death of a man. He's sitting in seat 43A. His name's Molyneux. And and the cause of death, it's not really clear. Some people think it's a heart attack.
Right. Others think it was something a bit more, well, sinister.
Exactly. And all this mystery surrounding his death just adds to the unsettling feeling of the whole story. I mean, think about it. The narrator, they're hearing all these different theories. Nobody really knows what happened, and they just have to deal with that uncertainty, which is, I think, a pretty common experience when someone dies suddenly, unexpectedly.
Definitely. It can be hard to process, especially under those circumstances.
So anyway, the flight attendants, they do their best in this tough situation, right? They buckle Mr. Molyneux back into his seat, they cover him with a blanket, but then things get really strange when the pilot gets on the intercom and he asks for a volunteer to come sit next to the deceased man.
Yeah. You have to wonder what was going through that pilot's head, right? I mean, to actually ask that over the intercom.
Exactly. It makes you think about the emotional and psychological impact of death, even on the people who aren't directly involved. Imagine all the other passengers on that flight, knowing that there's a dead person on board, trapped with them, essentially in this metal tube, hurtling through the air. I don't know if I could handle that.
It would be a lot to process, that's for sure.
So, to everyone's surprise, the narrator, they volunteer to switch seats.
Wow. What do you think motivated them to do that?
Well, they describe feeling a mix of things: exhaustion, maybe some altruism, and probably a little morbid curiosity. It's a decision that not everyone would make, that's for sure.
Right. Yeah, it takes a certain type of person to willingly put themselves in that situation, a certain resilience, maybe even a fascination with the macabre. I mean, let's be real, they're choosing to sit next to death, something most of us try pretty hard to avoid.
And that's exactly what they do. The narrator sits down next to Mr. Molyneux. He's still buckled in his seat, covered by that blanket. And at first, everything seems relatively peaceful, except for one disturbing detail.
Oh, yeah, the narrator describes Molyneux's hands. They say his hands are, quote, twisted into claws, end quote.
Yeah, it's a pretty vivid image, and definitely not a peaceful one.
It makes you think about how he might have died. Maybe he was in a lot of pain. It just adds another layer of creepiness to the whole thing.
Definitely. It kind of shatters any illusion of peacefulness. And it definitely foreshadows the unsettling events that are about to happen. This subtle shift, this shift in Molyneux's position under the blanket, this is really where the story takes a turn. I mean, the narrator's obviously disturbed, right? But it's still early in the flight, so I imagine they're trying to convince themselves that it's nothing, you know, that they're just imagining things.
Oh, absolutely. The human mind, it's really good at making connections, finding patterns, even when there's nothing there. And especially when you're dealing with fear and uncertainty, it can really mess with your perception.
So the narrator, they're trying to ignore this nagging feeling that something is wrong, right? But eventually they can't take it anymore. And they slowly lift the blanket, revealing something truly chilling.
What they see is Molyneux's head. It's not facing straight ahead anymore. It's turned towards the window. And his eyes are appearing to move in the reflection.
That's creepy.
It's a really powerful image, this supposedly lifeless body showing signs of movement. It directly challenges our understanding of death. It's like the ultimate taboo.
And of course, the woman sitting across the aisle, she sees the narrator uncovering the deceased. And she reacts with horror. I mean, can you blame her?
Not at all. Put yourself in her shoes. It would be like a scene out of a nightmare.
Right. And for the narrators, I mean, it's like their perception of reality is being questioned. And then before the narrator can even process what they're seeing or explain themselves to the woman, the plane is hit with this sudden and violent turbulence.
And this is not your average turbulence. The narrator describes it as incredibly violent, way beyond the normal bumps and shakes you'd expect on a transatlantic flight. Passengers are being thrown around, luggage is flying everywhere. It's just chaos.
And amidst all this chaos, the narrator sees Molyneux's body, and it's being flung about by the turbulence like a rag doll. And, and his head is repeatedly hitting the window with just incredible force.
Yeah. The story really shifts gears here. It goes from this psychological suspense to more of a, I don't know, an action horror kind of feel.
It becomes less about what the narrator is seeing and feeling, and more about the very real danger that everyone on board is facing.
And the pilot, he comes on the PA system. You could hear the distress in his voice. And he can't explain the turbulence.
Right? Which just adds to the fear and uncertainty. I mean, nobody knows what's happening.
Exactly. And when humans are confronted with the unknown, it triggers our deepest survival instincts. It's primal fear.
And, earlier in the flight, the narrator mentioned seeing these shapes in the fog outside the window. It's not clear if they were real or just their imagination running wild, but given what's happening with the turbulence, it just adds to this feeling that something is terribly wrong.
Right. It's like the turbulence isn't just some random weather event. It feels connected to the deceased man. It feels deliberate.
Yeah, almost like it's targeted, like something is controlling it.
Exactly. And overwhelmed by the chaos and this horrifying image of Molyneux's body being battered around, the narrator decides to seek refuge in the airplane bathroom.
The bathroom, this tiny little space, it becomes their escape from the horror.
But it's a temporary escape. They can't hide in there forever.
So what happens when they finally come back out? What do they find?
Well, they emerge back into the cabin, and it's a scene of utter destruction.
It's just total chaos out there. Flight attendants are injured, luggage and debris are everywhere, and the passengers are panicking.
I can only imagine. It's as if that sense of order and control you usually find on a plane, it's been completely shattered.
It's kind of like a glimpse into our primal instincts, What happens when we're faced with a life-or-death situation, all sense of civilization just disappears. And what's left are the rawest forms of human emotion, fear, survival, that need for connection. For someone, anyone, to just tell you it's going to be all right.
Absolutely. It strips us bare, shows us what we're really made of. And in the middle of all this chaos, the narrator, they're drawn back to Molyneux, that deceased passenger. He's become the center of this whole disturbing ordeal.
But this time, he's not just being tossed around by the turbulence. The narrator, they hear these really loud bangs above them. And when they look up, they see Molyneux's body still strapped into that window seat. But he's smashing against the window. It's like he's doing it on purpose, and with a force that just seems impossible.
It's almost as if those moving eyes the narrator saw earlier, they weren't just a trick of the light. Like Molyneux is trying to break free to get to something outside the plane.
The thought of a dead body acting with intention, it just sends chills down my spine. It really makes you question everything you thought you knew about life and death. Like where does one end and the other begin?
It really taps into that primal fear of the unknown, that there are forces out there we can't even begin to understand, forces that might control us, even in death. It's a fear that's been around for centuries. You see it in all our myths and legends and horror stories.
And that fear, it's only amplified when the narrator hears this cracking sound coming from the window. Like those repeated impacts are actually having an effect.
The tension here, it's almost unbearable. You've got the physical danger, the turbulence, the possibility that the window could shatter, and then you've got the psychological horror of it all, this dead body that seems to be acting on its own.
And then, just when you think it can't get any worse, Molyneux does the unthinkable. He smashes out both panes of the window with his head, and his body's left hanging, half in and half out of the plane.
That shattered window, it's like a symbol, a breach in the barrier between the known and the unknown. It's as if the laws of nature are being broken right in front of them.
It's a truly terrifying image, but there's also something strangely liberating about it, don't you think?
Oh, I absolutely agree. It's terrifying because it represents this ultimate loss of control, like something inexplicable and possibly malevolent has invaded our world. But it's also liberating because it suggests that there might be more out there, something beyond our limited human understanding of life and death.
Exactly, like we're just scratching the surface of what's really possible. So here we are, Molyneux's half out of the plane, the wind is rushing through the broken window, the cabin is in total chaos. What does the narrator do?
In a moment of incredible clarity, or maybe just pure desperation, the narrator unbuckles Molyneux's seatbelt, letting his body fall into the night sky.
Wow, talk about a tough decision. What do you think was going through their mind at that point?
It could have been an act of mercy, or maybe desperation, or even a recognition that Molyneux was beyond help, that he was being pulled towards something beyond our comprehension.
Like he was being called home. in a way.
Yes, exactly, like surrendering to the unknown, accepting that there are just some things in this universe we'll never fully understand.
And what's even more unbelievable, the moment Molyneux's body leaves the plane, the turbulence stops. Just like that, the fog outside disappears, the oxygen masks retract, and the pilot manages to regain control of the plane, eventually landing safely in New York.
It's as if Molyneux's presence was somehow causing all the chaos, like he was a conduit for some unknown force, and once he was gone, balance was restored.
Like he served his purpose, or maybe he reached his destination, and the turbulence just stopped, leaving everyone on board to pick up the pieces and try to make sense of what happened.
But of course, the official explanation is much simpler, much more palatable, an unexplained weather anomaly, some debris, nothing to see here, folks.
They completely ignore the fact that a dead man somehow broke through reinforced airplane windows. I guess sometimes the truth is just too hard to swallow.
Especially when it challenges our most deeply held beliefs about life, death, and the order of the universe.
But the narrator, they're not buying it. They're left with this deep sense of unease, haunted by the experience and by this question that just won't go away. What really happened on that flight? And they end their story with a message. It's directed at Molyneux, or maybe at whatever force he represented. Whatever you saw out there, whatever you were looking for, go to it and leave us be.
A plea for peace, for a return to normalcy. But it's also an admission that there are forces out there, vast and unknown, forces we may never understand. And maybe, just maybe, it's better that way.
This story, it's a stark reminder that even in our modern world, a world of technology and scientific advancement, there are still mysteries that defy explanation. We like to think we have it all figured out. The truth is, we're just scratching the surface. We should stay humble, acknowledge the limits of what we know, and maybe, just maybe, listen a little closer to those unsettling whispers at the edges of our understanding.
Maybe those whispers are trying to tell us something important about ourselves, about the universe we live in.
So the next time you're on a long flight, glancing out the window at those endless clouds, remember this story and the unsettling truth it reveals. We're all just passengers on this journey into the unknown.
And sometimes, the most terrifying encounters we face aren't with monsters or demons, but with the mysteries that lie within ourselves and the world around us. Thank you for joining us for this chilling tale of the moving corpse.
Until next time, sleep well, and maybe keep that window shade closed.